Good morning to you, and I'm glad that you have decided to join us this morning. The show is Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Agutu, and being a Monday, I have so much to bring you up to date with what has been happening in the continent across over the weekend up to today, the 19th of December 2022. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you tuned in and joining us from. So before we get into the detailed news bulletin, let me bring us up to date with the latest newspaper headlines, and we start with those from Kenya. The Daily Nation. Dirty little secret of Uhuru's project, a court battle for control of millions generated from offering government services online, which is a key pillar of President Kenyatta's 2013 election campaign, is revealing hitherto hidden information and which now risks grinding services to a halt and potentially trigger an economic crisis. That story is on page 4 and 5 on the Daily Nation. Love, fast cars and death. Two of Kenya's most celebrated motor rallying icons lived together for years, building cars and reputations that captured the imagination of the nation. All seemed well for them. And then on the morning of Jamhuri Day a week ago, a fight ensued between them that left one of them fighting for life in hospital. He lost the fight yesterday. What happened? That story is on page 6 and 7 on the Daily Nation. Ashagwa backs Kindiki IG on use of guns by police. That is on page 5. Teachers, families set for 53 billion Kenya shillings medical cover. The Standard newspaper, the world's greatest magical Messi proved to all that he is the greatest of all time after leading Argentina to a World Cup win, the only trophy he had not won in his career. That story is on page 4, 5, 38, 39 and 40, and indeed a very hearty congratulations to the Argentinian team and even to France. I think it was a wonderful game there to watch. Kept everybody on the edge of their seats. Okay, so inside Ruto's multi-billion deals with the US. That story is on page 6 and 7. Fees jitters as parents await KCPE results. You'll find that on page 3. The Star newspaper, the main pictorial, Messi's World Cup. Argentina win third title. That is there. And then ODM implodes in fresh war over change of guard. Youthful members of parliament wage a fierce fight against trusted lieutenants. That story is on page 4 and 5. And former MP under probe of a building contract. You also find that in there. And cars seizure, hefty fines as state titans scrap metal law. And then man killed by a bomb mistaken for candle. That story is on page 2. And that is what we have on Kenya's the 3 leading newspapers. Now let's turn our attention to some of the other papers from across the region. We start with those from Uganda. The Daily Monitor, Museveni defends son on political comments. Why? How old is this son that his father has to step in and, defend him? I guess he's like, 47 or something? A fully grown man. But anyway, the New Vision also from Uganda. A government directs on December salaries. And then the Daily News from, not from Tanzania, but from Zimbabwe. MDC conducts a chaotic Congress and meeting boycotts disputes and farcical scenes that you'll find there. The Herald, this is from Zimbabwe, power supply plan finalized. And then the Nation from Nigeria, Atiku dumps Makinde for Adeleke bypass G5. Very well, The Guardian also from Nigeria, concerns as government shrugs off key inflation drivers. The New Times from Rwanda, consumers may have to dig deeper after tax hikes. And then the City Press, that is from South Africa, I believe, ANC's bitter battle is in full swing. The Citizen from Tanzania, how World Cup sent meat exports soaring. Okay, so that is what we have in a few regional newspapers. So now let's just turn our attention to some news bulletin from across the continent, and we start with a news from Burkina Faso. And the military in Burkina Faso have summoned Ghana's ambassador of allegations they have hired Russian mercenaries to help fight jihadists. Wagner Group's presence in Burkina Faso was distressing, said Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo. Burkina Faso has been struggling to contain Islamist militants who operate in many parts of the country. Neighboring Mali faces a similar challenge and is already widely believed to be working with Wagner. Since Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in Burkina Faso in September, there had been widespread speculation that he might follow suit and start working with the Russian mercenaries. Both countries have already cut long-standing security ties with France, the former colonial power. While visiting Ghana, the UK's Minister for Development and Africa, Andrew Michel, said Britain was concerned about the activities of Russian mercenaries in West Africa. We head over to Tunisia, and the main opposition coalition has said President Kais Saied must resign after fewer than 9% of eligible voters took part in parliamentary elections. The National Salvation Front head, Najib Chebe, said Saturday's poll was a fiasco, calling for mass protests to demand snap presidential elections. The vote was boycotted by most opposition parties. They accuse Mr. Saied of reversing the democratic progress made since 2011 uprising, a charge he denies. After sacking the Prime Minister and suspending Parliament in July 2021, a year later, Mr. Said pushed through a constitution enshrining his one-man rule after a vote that was also boycotted by main opposition parties. The new constitution replaced one drafted soon after the Arab Spring in 2011, which saw Tunisia overthrow late dictator Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali. It gave the head of state full executive control and supreme command of the army. We head over to Ethiopia. In the latest sign of the deep crisis that has engulfed Ethiopia, conflict in the vast Oromia region, the heartland of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, is escalating as political and ethnic tensions explode. It has seen Oromo Liberation Army OLA rebel raid towns that were once out of their reach and hold graduation ceremonies to boost of their new recruits, while the government has responded with troop reinforcement and drone strikes as it rules out talks to end the crisis. Adding to the dangerous cocktail, much feared from the rival Amara ethnic groups are widely believed to have crossed into Oromia to fight the rebels. The OLA are increasingly projecting themselves as the champions of Oromo nationalism, gaining publicity in opposition-linked media outlets that just a few years ago treated them as marginal players in Ethiopian conflict. The government-appointed Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, HRC, says that hundreds of people have been killed in gruesome manner in the past 5 months in Oromia, while a UN agency says almost 1 million people have been forced into their homes. From their homes, all sides in the conflict deny accusations they have committed human rights abuses. And then we head over to Liberia. Hundreds of Liberians gathered on Saturday in a suburb of Monrovia to demonstrate against President George Weah. The protest was organized by the opposition as the country grapples with soaring prices and shortages of basic goods. The leader of opposition coalition CPP and potential presidential candidate accused President Weah of failure. CPP spokesperson Lewis Brown added that those who were tired of suffering and scared to be there, who were because they were scared and tired. He said this was the beginning of a march to a new Liberia. President Weah has been out of the country since the end of October and is expected to return officially, I think yesterday, after 7 weeks away. Liberians are set to choose a new president and parliament in October 2023. And we head over to Morocco. France and Morocco announced on Friday the re-establishment of full diplomatic relations following months of tensions over visas. The row was sparked in September last year when France halved its visa code for Moroccans in retaliation for the kingdom's refusal to repatriate citizens living as irregular migrants in France. The Moroccan foreign minister reiterated the importance of the human dimension in the relationship between the two countries. During the visit, the French foreign minister took the opportunity to announce that President Macron would be visiting the North African kingdom early in 2023. And then the latest from Rwanda, President Paul Kagame was a vocal defender of Africa's quest to expand its economic partnership with China, saying the continent has a right to seek partners and China is filling a gap for investment. This is after President Joe Biden's administration sought to deflect the perception that its summit last week was aimed at competing with China, which has surpassed the U.S. in trade and economic cooperation with Africa. In the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit held between December 13th and 15th, China was the unspoken factor, while there are increasing concern over the possibility of China trapping African countries in debt. President Kagame said the blame should be on both sides, as countries should borrow cautiously. According to a July 2022 report by Debt Justice, a UK charity working to end poverty caused by unjust debt, African governments owe 3 times more to Western banks, asset managers and oil traders than to China, and are charged double the interest. And then we head over to Burundi, to the East African Community rather. The implementation of East African Communities program is increasingly being hindered by funding gaps as some of the member states struggle to remit their statutory subscription fees. The Audit Commission report prepared by the East African Legislative Assembly for the year ended June 30th, 2021 indicates that the bloc continues to grapple with various challenges blamed on poor funding due to delayed or non-remittance of funds by partner states. The EAC budget is mainly funded through member states' contributions and development partners' support. South Sudan owes EAC to $29.4 million. Burundi owes $12.4 million, Rwanda $3.6 million, Uganda $3.4 million, and Tanzania $1,915 US, and Kenya owes only $20. Oh, congratulations to Kenya. We're doing pretty well. Only $20. Even I can pay that for my country, but that is how much the member states owe the East African community. All right, we head over to Rwanda again, and judges at London's High Court will rule Monday whether the British government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is legal, as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stakes his future on stopping a record number of migrant arrivals in small boats. Under a new deal struck in April, Britain's aim to send tens of thousands of migrants who arrive on its shores illegally more than 4,000 miles to Rwanda. The first planned deportation flight was blocked in June by a last-minute injunction from the European Court of Human Rights, and the strategy's lawfulness was subsequently challenged by a judicial review at London's High Court. And then we go to Somalia, where the U.S. military has reported 2 new airstrikes against al-Shabaab fighters in Somalia's Hirshabelle state. In a statement, the U.S. military in Africa says it conducted 2 collective self-defense strikes against the group on December 14th and 17th in the vicinity of the coastal town of Adale. The strikes came at the request of the federal government of Somalia in the support of the Somali National Army Forces. The first strike took place 176 kilometers northeast of Mogadishu, killing 7 militants, while the second strike took place approximately 220 kilometers northeast of Mogadishu, killing 8 al-Shabaab fighters. Meanwhile, the Somali military says the country's national army, with the help of local civilians, has conducted a planned military operation against the Islamist militant group al-Shabaab in the Middle Shabelle region, killing at least 50 al-Shabaab militants. A statement issued by Somali's National Army Command on Saturday says the army's planned operation against the militants took place in the village of Darul Nishin in the country's Middle Shabelle province. The village on the outskirts of the recently liberated strategic town of Adan Yubal, 217 kilometers north of the capital Mogadishu, has seen an increase in military activity in the last 3 weeks. And we go to Nigeria. The Yoruba World Congress has endorsed the All Progressive Congress presidential candidate Asiwaju Bola Tinubu for the 2023 election, saying that his president's qualities, ideals and dreams for the betterment of Nigeria put him far ahead of other contenders for the country's exalted seat. YWC representative in Ekiti State, Adewolo Olusegun, who said the body decided to give, given what Tinubu represented and his manifesto, say the FVC candidate would bring about a better and more developed Nigeria to the delight of Nigerian citizens, adding that the Yoruba tribe would immensely benefit from it. And then we head over to Sudan. an agreement to relaunch a political transition in Sudan and unlock billions of dollars in frozen international support faces many pitfalls, including distrust of the signatories and splits over issues left to a second phase of talks, analysts now say. The outline deal signed by the military and civilian parties on December 5th also provides no guarantees that army leaders who staged a coup just over 1 year ago will cede real powers despite their promise to step back from politics. They said the military takeover in October 2021 plunged Sudan into uncertainty, triggering a long campaign of mass demonstrations against the army and derailing an economic and political opening began after the overthrow of longtime leader Omar al-Bashir 2.5 years ago. And now, the framework agreement signed this month charts an exit from the crisis for the countries of 45 million, which lies in a strategic position between the Red Sea and the Sahel, but sets no deadline and is vague on next steps. These include tackling questions that fueled tensions between the military and the civilians. Then they shared power before the coup, reform of the security forces, justice for civilians killed during protests, dismantling Bashir's regime, and a push to end decades of internal conflict in the Darfur and other regions. And you are now up to date with the latest news from across the continent of Africa. A very good morning to you, and I'll just start from where I've just left there. That story in Sudan, I think, was it about 2 weeks ago, where the military leadership and the civilian side, I think, relaunched a political transition, signed another agreement. You know, after the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir, there was put in place a transitional government that in about 11 members headed this transitional government. I think the civilian side had 6 people, the military side had 5 people, but even before even agreeing to the composition of that transitional government, it took a lot of back and forth because, as you know, during the times of President Omar al-Bashir, the army was at the center and at the core of leadership in Sudan. And so the leadership, the military side of the leadership in Sudan was finding it, and still does find it, very difficult to just allow and agree for the civilian side of the leadership to have a leeway on certain matters. Omar al-Bashir ruled by the military during his 30-year reign in Sudan, and a lot of the military junta that we see in top positions now and part of the leadership were part of that regime. So that's all they know. And the military even owns businesses and runs businesses in that country. So they are at the core and the center of the leadership in Sudan. So just hoping that maybe they will make way for a civilian rule. I think that will happen, but not anytime soon. And now some of the things that they had agreed upon, I think about 2 weeks ago when they signed that new agreement. Remember, Hamdok, who was the prime minister from the civilian side, I think he sort of stepped down, and there's a time he was put under house arrest, and a lot of things have been happening. This transition government was supposed to be in place for about 3 years. So you start counting from 2019. They were supposed to be at least having elections or preparing to have a transitional election next year, or because 2002 has passed. But that has not been the case. And I'll tell you why. So some of these things that they agreed upon about 2 weeks ago, let me just read through them very quickly, because there was no framework in this agreement according to how some of these things are going to be implemented, or some of these issues and concerns were going to be addressed. The first was for reform of the security forces and justice for civilians killed, and reform of the security forces, justice for civilians killed during the protest, and dismantling Bashir's regime, and then a push to end decades of internal conflict in Darfur and other regions. Fine. Now, the last part is doable to some huge extent. I think it's doable, and the president of South Sudan, President Salva Kiir, has been the one leading mediation in Sudan between the government forces and the rebel groups, and these are the groups in Darfur, to try to mediate. And there has been some progress in that regard, but there has been some tensions and a few conflicts here and there. But President Salva Kiir, I think, has done a good job in bringing majority of these rebel groups to the table together with the Sudan government, and we've seen a few progress being made. So the last bit of that is not too hard to achieve, because it does not directly conflict with the leadership of Sudan. But the other three demands, this is where the problem is, because if you say you want to reform security forces, these security forces are in charge of the country. These security forces have been in charge of Sudan, as I have explained there, since when President Omar al-Bashir was in power. When you talk about justice for civilians killed during the protest, it is the security forces that killed these civilians. It is. So when you say justice for these people who were killed, you're essentially asking part of the leadership of Sudan to be taken into account over the killings of these protesters. Do you think they're going to do that? I don't think so. And then another question there is dismantling Bashir's regime. Now that will be a daunting task. And I'll just go back to my explanation earlier. The people we see right now, the part of the military junta that we see right now in Sudan, a part of the leadership, they worked with Omar al-Bashir. They were part and parcel of the regime of Omar al-Bashir. So if you're saying that you're going to dismantle Bashir's regime, what you're essentially saying is the side of the military junta and top military officials and in Sudan, then you're going to dismantle that. That is not going to happen. The second in command, what is his name? I'm forgetting his name. The leader of the Sudan Rapid Force, or otherwise known as the Janjaweed, that was, has been mentioned widely with the killings that happen in Darfur region, that now we see ICC chief prosecutor is setting up office in Sudan, and they're trying to open up new investigations over these killings that happen in the Darfur region. The second in command in Sudan's military leadership, this person is the head of that. Now they call it Sudan Rapid Force, but they are the Janjaweed. All right, Hemedi, I think that is his nickname, Hemedi. So if you think that now this is the things that the military side will agree to implement, then I think Sudan still has a long way to go as far as realizing civilian rule is concerned. And the reason why that will be a problem, because if this is what the civilian side is pushing for, and if this is what the agreement was, then chances are, should a civilian leader come to power, they start pushing for such reforms, and they start pushing to implement some of these things, then it will, it will bring a conflict even within the military itself. That means that the head of military, might be having to be answered to some charges. As I said, the second in command in the military, Hemedi, could be mentioned because he is the head of the Sudan Rapid Force, otherwise known as the Janjaweed. They have been accused. And so these demands, I don't know why they signed into things that they know very well are not going to be implemented. I don't see how you're going to reform the security forces. The security forces have had their way in Sudan for such a long time. That is how they have been. So for you to think that you're going to upset the status quo, I think that is something that is not going to happen right now. And then you add to the fact that the ICC has set up shop now in Sudan and wants to investigate the Darfur killings that happened a couple of years ago. And these security forces, a few of them are mentioned, because Omar al-Bashir did not take up a gun and went shooting people in Darfur. It is these leaders who give orders. It is these leaders who are in charge right now, who are part of the people who are implementing these orders. So there's no way you would expect them now to agree to have to support even this process, ICC. First of all, that will be frustrated. I don't see how they will cooperate. I don't see how they will be willing to work with the Office of the Public Prosecutor, Khan, in this ICC case to try to bring them to book, because you will be bringing them to book, some of them. So I don't see, so for that reason by itself, I don't see how they will be willing at this point in time to facilitate a transition that will enable a civilian rule to come to power. Because a civilian rule might want to cooperate with the ICC, might want to create a process where accountability, can finally come to the people who were affected in Darfur, and also some of the killings that we saw, the protesters being killed, because one of the demands here, or one of the things they signed and agreed upon, was justice for civilians killed during protests. And we know, according to some very substantial reports, it is the security forces who shot at these protesters and killed them. So you want the same security forces to cooperate, to bring themselves to accountability. I don't see that happening, because we know the structures, the accountability structures now in Sudan is not there. For heaven's sakes, they suspended the constitution after the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir in 2019. And right now, I don't know what they're using. Perhaps it's common law, perhaps it's Sharia law, but we know that part of the things that the civilian side of the leadership wanted was to have a new constitution that was a bit liberal, that was not hinged much on Sharia law. So they wanted something liberal. But the security forces, the other side of the military junta, wanted a constitution that was based on Sharia law. So that they could not agree on that, became a point of conflict and departure. So not much progress has been made in that regard. So the constitution remains suspended. They've not started the process of constitutional making, but first they need to settle down. Perhaps they need a new government to come in place so that they're able to actually start this process. But as it is right now, it is not happening, and so that is what is happening there. So it's interesting, but I don't see. I think some of these, when you sit down and look at some of these things that they agreed upon, you can tell there's no will here to actually move forward, to actually place the country on a path of transition where Sudan can be headed by a civilian rule. The military is not willing to do that, and for obvious reasons, some which I've already mentioned. They're not willing to do that. They are part of whatever goes on in Sudan. They are part of institutions. They had institutions. They had very important key things and places and institutions there in Sudan. So just having them march back to the barracks and hand over the powers and the reins of Sudan to a civilian person, they're finding it very difficult. And that is because of the many years during Omar al-Bashir, who ruled for 30 years. That is what they were used to doing. So now it will be very difficult for them to engage different, for them to allow for kind of a different dispensation. I don't think they're ready for that. And what is at stake when they leave the civilian at the helm of the country is also too much for them, just in reference to even the ICC case and other things. So that is something they will not be willing to do. So this agreement here, I don't see how they are going to implement it. And already it already faces a lot of pitfalls, and including mistrust of the signatories and splits over issues left to second phase of the talks. So already even the issues that they agreed and they appended their signatures upon and agreed upon, they know quite well. One side knows pretty well that there's no willingness for them to live up to that agreement. So there's already some mistrust even before the ink has dried, and pitfalls. So okay, I think transition in Sudan will take a bit longer than we had expected. And then when you look at the other, the ousting of Omar al-Bashir, a lot of external factors played a huge role in the ousting of Omar al-Bashir, leading up to when he was removed from power. I think it happened in April 2019, just after President Bouteflika of Algeria had also been ousted from power just earlier before that, and then Omar al-Bashir was removed in April 2019, the same year. So there is was it like a chief? He was like the chief cabinet secretary or something. Here we used to have Matiang'i. I think right now it is Mudavadi in Kenya, one who is just above everybody else, and that person was a very key ally and confidant of President Omar al-Bashir. And interestingly enough, he held a very key position in Omar al-Bashir's government. But at the same time, he was working with Saudi Arabia. Matter of fact, by the time the government, President Omar al-Bashir was being tipped of this person not being trustworthy, it was already too late. He was a double agent for Sudan's government and for Saudi Arabia. So he was working on behalf of Saudi Arabia, but and Omar al-Bashir did not know about it. So when he knew it, that person ran away from the country and went to Saudi Arabia. And immediately he went to Saudi Arabia, he was offered citizenship in Saudi Arabia immediately. So now during the peace talks after Omar al-Bashir was ousted, and during that time that there were some peace talks and countries were pretending like they want to come in and provide mediation, guess who Saudi Arabia sent in their entourage? That person was one of the key people Saudi Arabia sent together with others from the Saudi government to come and pretend to want to mediate and these other things. So it's quite complicated what we see play out, and the people who funded who were funding the protesters and all that. So the ousting of President Omar al-Bashir, as much as there were some internal factors and perhaps people were just tired and wanted some change, but also other interests were being played out, and a lot of proxy wars were playing out in Sudan that maybe the ordinary Sudanese did not realize that as much as they were out there agitating and fighting and calling and wanting change and just demanding for it, but there were other factors that was at play during that time that they couldn't realize was actually the case. And so that happened. Omar al-Bashir was ousted from power. He still remains under custody in Sudan, and we know he is a wanted man by the International Criminal Court, that is the ICC. At this point, former President Omar al-Bashir has nothing to lose, so I don't think he'll mind being taken to the ICC. The problem is the military junta will not agree to take him because they have to protect. They're not protecting him from the ICC. Let me just make that very clear. They have to protect themselves, because at this point, as I said, President Omar al-Bashir has nothing to lose, former president. So when he goes to the ICC, he will be happy to cooperate with the ICC and say some truth and spill some beans and implicate key people who are now part of the government, especially the military side, okay? And so they will not agree. They will not agree to take him there. And I know they're saying, they're protecting him and they don't see a reason to take him because they have their own court process and he's being tried. And he's been tried for money laundering. I think it was with him after he was ousted, he had a lot of money that could not be explained where he got it from. But later on it was traced to a certain country that was brought to him, and others, and corruption and others and other charges. But the ICC is looking for him and want him to be tried over the Darfur killings at the ICC because he has a warrant of arrest over his head. But the military will not deliver him, and it's not because they're protecting him, it's because they're protecting themselves. At this point, former President Omar al-Bashir has nothing to lose. So it's this story about the funding gaps in the East African community. We know it has been struggling. It has sent its forces now to the Democratic Republic of Congo to try and help with the implementation of peace. And I don't know, I've not heard any report from the EAC force. I'd like to know what they're doing there, because the community is using a lot of money to support their mission there. And even as it does that, the community has no money to support some of the community's programs are increasingly being hindered by funding gaps because some member states struggle to remit their statutory subscription fee. And the Audit Commission report prepared by the East African Legislative Assembly for the year ended 30th 2021 indicates that the bloc continues to grapple. So South Sudan is the biggest debtor. It owes the EAC about $29.4 million US dollars, followed by Burundi. We know during President Pierre Nkurunziza, I know Burundi is struggling, but maybe it's just his attitude towards the East African community, former President Pierre Nkurunziza, the late now. So the remittance of Burundi in the East African community was not as good. Okay, so Burundi owes about 12.4 million US dollars of its statutory subscription fees. Rwanda comes third with 3.6 million US dollars. Okay, President Paul Kagame pay up, and Uganda as well, 3.4 million US dollars. I don't know what is the reason for that, President Museveni. Why do you owe so much? 3.4 million US dollars. Tanzania owes about 1,915 US dollars, so not much, but still a pay up. And Kenya owes only $20, okay, which is quite interesting. So a lot of this, you know, the community runs from the good faith of its members who are supposed to be paying for its running. For its running. So when the members are not able to pay in good time, then the activities of the communities are hampered greatly. And so I think it's been struggling. And according to Susan Nakawuki, who is an EALA member from Uganda, she says the situation has persisted the past decade, blaming it on lack of political will. As I've mentioned there, former President Pierre Nkurunziza of Burundi, I think for him, he was not just willing to pay up, so he used to drag so much. So I think this is an accumulation from his time, I'm assuming, the part for Burundi. And for South Sudan, we know South Sudan is just struggling with everything. It's struggling with its internal debts, struggling now to pay this monies for the East African community. And there's too much going on. So that's why I think when I heard that they were going to use about 9.6 million US dollars to send their troops to the Democratic Republic of Congo, I was stunned. I wondered, where is South Sudan getting the money from? Because they are struggling in their own country to meet their own demands of what South Sudanese need. So I don't know if taking their forces to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I know it was a requirement, it was an agreement within the EAC, member blocks for them to create an EAC force to go and help with the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I wondered if that was supposed to be a priority for South Sudan as much as it was required of them. But sometimes you have to look at what is the priority for you as a country first. What is your priority, South Sudan, before you use 9.6 million US dollars to send 750 soldiers to the DRC? You need that money. You need that money. And not that because the DRC will not need the services of you as servicemen, but I'm just saying sometimes you have to prioritize. And so look at now, you have so much that you've not paid up in the East African community. So this Susan Nakawuki, the EALA member, says the problem has persisted for a decade now, I guess since South Sudan joined, and also since Pierre Nkurunziza was in power, blaming it on lack of political will and general lack of resources among member states to finance their integration goals. For South Sudan, I would understand. I try to cut them some slack a lot of times. They're struggling. Like South Sudan has so much on its plate that it's understandable that they would lack money. But also Burundi. Burundi is one of the poorest countries in Africa. I think we fail to recognize that. It is one of the poorest countries in Africa, and there has been some turmoil and some conflict that has been ongoing. It's not in the magnitude of what we see in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but nevertheless, it has been there, and some political instability that has really affected even the economy of that country. If you have political instability, that means investors are not attracted, to such a scenario. And so Burundi has been struggling within itself, and Burundi has been grappling with its poor economic situation. So also I think I'd like to extend some understanding in that regard, but also the lack of political goodwill was lacking, especially during the late President Pierre Nkurunziza's time. The EAC budget is mainly funded through member states' contributions and development partners' support. According to the audit report, the activities of the community during the 2020-2021 financial year were funded by a budgetary appropriation of $99.74 million compared to with 119.14 million in 2019-2020. So there has been a decline by $19.4 million. So, and development partners' contributions accounted for about 43% of the total budget, showing a decrease of about 24.5% from 57.12 million percent in 2019-2020 financial year. Okay, so that is what is there. So anyway, I think it will be prudent for the members to just pay up. Those who are supposed to be paying, they should just pay up so that, the East African community can continue running its affairs without any hitches. So in that story, I think I've mentioned that there has been some funders. That will mean some external individuals or institutions or people or countries, especially in the West, I think, funding. I think I get very wary when I hear about funders funding very important institutions or now the East African community. I think we should be able to fund that ourselves. When you're able to fund certain things by yourselves as countries, then you run your agenda. But when you have other people coming to fund your activities, like now we saw Zimbabwe, China build its new parliament, and then now the ECOWAS, I don't know, China is coming to build its headquarters, I think. That's what we were talking about last week. And I don't know what other country. When you have other funders or other actors or other countries come in and support certain activities or fund certain things in your country or countries, then you are inviting internal interference after they have funded your activities in the EAC. Now you cannot tell them that no, as Africans or as EAC member states, we cannot agree to certain terms of trade. We cannot agree to this. This is not okay with that. This does not sit well with us. I think this trade imbalance should be addressed. Like you lose your voice. You lose your voice, you lose yourself, and now you are at the mercy of funders. If they're funding 43% of your activities, you sort of give away your sovereignty. You sort of give away your certain important rights, and so you're not able to run your own agendas. And that's why you find that there are conflicts in such institutions, because you find a section of members now perhaps are being used to advance the interest of these funders. And I'm not saying that is the case, but I would imagine, EAC, African Union, I've not heard anybody going to fund the EU. And that's why you see EU is one of the strongest, blocks that we have in the world. NATO, look at how they run their affairs. They're able to decide by themselves, this is what we want to do, this is what the members have agreed upon, and this is what will be implemented, because the member states are funding their own activities. So there's no external pressure, there is no external agenda. They're very clear on what they're doing. The EU, they're very clear on what they're doing, so they're able to even hold members accountable. You saw about 2 weeks ago about that story that broke out that some members of parliament, the EU parliament, were compromised by Qatar in line with the World Cup. Another story for another day. And each country where those members came from took action against these members of parliament, because whatever they did is not in line with the EU principles and their values and what they stand for and what they do, which sometimes is conflicted. But on this case, they were able to take action, because you know what? They cannot be influenced, because they fund their own activities, they have their own agenda which they run, and when they send these when member states send these members of parliament to the EU parliament, they are representing their interest. So if they have other things that conflict with whatever their mandate is, then the countries are able to hold them accountable. So that is what happens. You have sovereignty. You're able to decide on your own matters. But when you have other external factors coming in, and that's when you see a lot of conflict emanating from a lot of that's why you find ECOWAS now. Let me just go to the first story I think I just read. Burkina Faso now is angered over Russian mercenary link, because I think last week President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, during the Africa-US summit in the US, he said that they are wary in that group, in that region, because of Russia's mercenary group now, and he particularly mentioned now they are in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, why are you mad? The Russian mercenaries are there. I think we have been covering this story, and I think I've been talking about it because there has been some very substantial proof that indeed there are mercenaries, the Wagner group in your country. And we've seen after they came now, your relationship with France became extremely shaky. In fact, it's almost non-existent now. You close down France's radio station. You're winding up the activities in that country. So that was affected, and all of a sudden we're now seeing Russian mining companies taking over key mining sectors in your country. Come on now, and we know that the Russian mercenaries, they're in your country. I don't know, to help you fight the jihadists and all that, together with Mali, Central African Republic, and these other countries. But we know the other interests behind that. So Burkina Faso's military authorities have summoned Ghana's ambassador over allegations that they have hired Russian mercenaries. And like I mentioned, President Akufo-Addo mentioned this, highlighted this concern last week. And the reason why President Akufo-Addo highlighted this concern last week is because 3 weeks ago, ECOWAS decided they're going to form an ECOWAS force, and in the ECOWAS region. These two countries are in the ECOWAS region, and the purpose of this force was to help fight the extremist groups, the jihadist groups, and also to protect. There has been a lot of coups, so I guess to prevent coups. I don't know if a coup happened, then the force will be mandated to intervene. I'm not sure. And then something else, I can't remember the other third mandate that this force is supposed to have. So you can't have this group coming together and agreeing to form this force, and then have other countries working with other countries that the rest of the members might not agree to. And that's why, as I was giving the example of EU and how successful of a bloc it has become, is because you cannot infiltrate. They have their own agenda and they're very clear about it. Come back to our continent. Look at ECOWAS. You have other members dancing to their tune and representing other interests from outside even the continent that is always putting them in collusion with the rest of the member states. So if they have agreed to form an ECOWAS force to fight extremist groups, that means there will be no place for the Russian mercenary in Burkina Faso, in Mali, I don't know which other country, in there. They cannot be there. They cannot be there purporting to do the same thing. So the countries must come together and speak in one voice and have the same vision so that this can be successful. And that's why you see other countries pulling out, like Germany. We saw France. France, its history is complicated and issues with these countries is complicated. But we saw Britain also pulling out, because once the Russian mercenaries came, they came with a different agenda, and perhaps their goal and what these other forces and these other countries' goals were not in agreement, and the strategy and whatever it is they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it was not agreeing. So they pulled out, and they're pulling out, So you can't have that. So Burkina Faso, you are either in ECOWAS. I know right now you've been suspended because you have a military junta there in the name of Ibrahim Traoré, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and he's the one who is now being used here. You don't understand. But anyway, you can't have these mercenaries and still want to have your forces in the ECOWAS forces and try to do the same thing. I think there will be a conflict a conflict there of interest and otherwise that will not be in agreement with the purpose and the vision of perhaps the ECOWAS bloc. It is something that they talked about. It has not been implemented yet, so perhaps they'll start working on it from January, the last I read of that report. So we're waiting to see. So, but Burkina Faso's military is not happy that President of Ghana, Akufo-Addo, brought this matter last week in the US, and so they summoned Ghana's ambassador to Burkina Faso, so that he can answer. Because what Ghana's president said is that the presence of the Wagner group is distressing to the region, and so perhaps they don't know how to associate anymore and how to have proper diplomatic ties. Anyway, the military is in power now. How to have proper diplomatic ties, with Burkina Faso, the people in that region. Okay, so that is that on that matter. Let me see. I still have a. Okay, so some problem I keep saying is keep brewing in Tunisia. We know President Kais Saied suspended Did he suspend the constitutional? He suspended parliament. He suspended other very important institutions, and I think he's been ruling by decree there in Tunisia. What he forgets is that Tunisia was the core of the Arab uprising. Remember in 2011 that removed Ben Ali? Yes, Tunisia was the heart of that. That is where the Arab Spring started in 2011, and he's been making very extreme changes in Tunisia that has not been sitting well with the opposition. So we've seen opposition has been very relentless in calling out and pushing back, and it has also been met with a lot of force. So President Kais decided that they're going to have parliamentary elections. And, opposition had boycotted these elections, and a lot of people were not in support of this. So only 9% of the registered voters turned out to vote. If that is not an indictment on your part, President Saied, I don't know what is. So now they're saying, because only 9% of eligible voters turned out, so you have no mandate. You have no mandate, and because of that, you should resign. So they're calling on the President Kais Saied to resign. The vote was boycotted by most opposition parties, and they accused Mr. Saied of reversing the democratic progress made since the 2011 uprising, a charge that the president has been denying after sacking the prime minister and suspending parliament in July 2021. A year later, Mr. Saied pushed through a constitution enshrining his one-man rule. He had a constitutional coup. That's what that was. A one-man rule after a vote that was also boycotted by the main opposition parties. This is a problem that is brewing, and I'm sure there are some other forces and factors that perhaps are supporting this kind of leadership, like they were doing with Omar al-Bashir, like they were doing with which other country? I can't remember. Well, Assad survived, but it gets to a point where they drop you. They're seeing, you're becoming more of a liability. So they will drop their support for Kais Saied, and before you know it, these protesters and the opposition, someone will fund them slowly. Yeah, they will be funded, and before you know it, he will be toppled. And I would hate to see Tunisia go back to that time. So. But trouble is brewing here. So if the president doesn't really make key changes there, and perhaps just stop negating some of these democratic gains that had been made since the 2011 uprising, then Tunisia is being set up for something that might not be as nice. But anyway, 9% of voters turned out to vote. That is an indictment, President Saied. You have no mandate. That is what that means. You have no mandate. So that's it. So let's wait and see how that will play out. Okay, another story that we have been following, and maybe I will not get too much into it because we shall look at it in our next session. The latest crisis in Ethiopia, and that is with the Oromo Liberation Army. We know part of the problem with the TPLF was solved. The mediation process went fairly well last month through the help of Nigeria's a former president who was picked by the African Union, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, together with Kenya's former President Uhuru Kenyatta. They did a fantastic job, and we've seen the mediation process been going on very well. But there are a section of other actors that felt they were left out, and they felt they also needed to be heard. And that is the Oromo Liberation Army. And a lot of things are happening. I know it's not in the magnitude that we saw the TPLF, the Tigray crisis, as it were, between the TPLF and the government. It is not in that magnitude, but it is slowly building up, slowly. And I think there are actors and a few, individuals, and I think, was it yesterday? Not yesterday, but I think sometimes back last week, there were a section of members of parliament from that region, about 80 of them or over, that were urging the Prime Minister to just have a meeting and listen to what the OLA are saying and see and listen up to their grievances and hear what they have to say and just have a talk, all right? Just have a talk with this group. And these are from his backyard. This is the heartland of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. This is where he comes from. And this crisis is escalating as political and ethnic tensions keep exploding. So if it's not brought under control right now, it might be even worse than what we see between the TPLF and the government forces. So my position in this matter has been, why wait until things become worse? Why wait until we start counting more dead bodies? Yeah, why wait until more people are uprooted from their homes? Why wait? Why can't you just avert that? Now I think it's worth it. It's worth sitting down. Human life is worth sitting down and discussing. When lives are at stake, I think it's worth sitting down and having a sober mind and just talk things through. But I guess the government of Ethiopia has proscribed the OLA as a terrorist group. They had proscribed TPLF as a terrorist group, right? But Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister, you still reached out through the mediation. It was not easy. You're still coerced, and yes, you agreed. And you had a conversation, and you agreed to be part of that mediation process, and you solved that matter. Progress is being made, and whatever is remaining, you're still solving it, and you will work through that out. So what is the big deal of us engaging with OLA? Yeah, if the other ones were also termed as a terrorist group, and you're terming this a terrorist group, but you agreed to meet with the TPLF, why would you not meet with the OLA? And I would understand your position where you feel that, the way they're engaging and the kind of violence perhaps they're advancing, that is something that you're not interested to meet with, perhaps a conversation, So maybe also the OLA should come with a peace in mind and should have a peaceful approach and not a violent approach, because at the end of the day, it is the innocent people who are dying and nobody wins. Nobody wins. In the TPLF conflict, the Tigray conflict, who won? Who won, really? Nobody won. Instead, what we have is an unprecedented human rights abuses. People who died who should not have died. Women who were raped who should not have been raped. Men and children who suffered, who did not deserve that. So nobody won, not the Ethiopian government, not the TPLF side. Nobody won really. And at the end of the day, you sat down and you talked. And then the losses were for what? So why can't we not avert the same here in this situation? So I think that is my belief. Diplomacy should be employed here, and a conversation should happen. And perhaps President Uhuru Kenyatta, you could extend yourself further. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta, you could extend, you and your team, you could extend yourself further and try if you could talk to your Pan-African brother, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and see if a solution can be gotten, because at the end of the day, when a war happens, nobody gets to win. And that is the truth of the matter. I thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogotu. Enjoy the rest of your day, but don't go too far. We shall be coming back with another conversation in just a short bit. Good morning.